and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. President Lee Jae-myung held a summit with his Singaporean counterpart and said the two countries have agreed to forge a strategic partnership. Meanwhile, following his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Gyeongju over the weekend, Lee said relations with China have been fully restored. This week, the U.S. Supreme Court will begin hearing arguments on the Trump administration's tariffs, examining whether the president had the legal authority to impose them. Ahead of the hearing, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent cited China's rare earth restrictions as justification for the tariff measures. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who's currently in Seoul, is set to visit the joint security area within the demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas, with South Korea's defense minister. This is the first time in 8 years that the defense chiefs of the two countries are visiting the JSA together. We begin this morning with a summit between President Lee Jae-myung and Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. Having wrapped up a busy diplomatic schedule in Gyeongju, Lee sat down with his Singaporean counterpart at his office and announced a strategic partnership. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
After returning from the APEC and related events in Gyeongju, President Lee Jae-myung hosted Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong at his office in Seoul, who also attended the multilateral event to forge a strategic partnership.
우리 총리님, 어제 경주에서 뵙고 다시 또 오늘 공식적으로 이곳에서 뵙게 됐는데.
And I've spent almost every day seeing you. So we don't feel like we are strangers to one another. I feel like I've known you for a long time already.
Areas of interest included cooperation on security, the economy, and AI at a time of increasing global uncertainties, as announced in a joint news conference.
앞으로 양국은 전략적 동반자 관계에 기초하여 변화하는 경제와 안보 환경에 대처하는 한편 전략 첨단 기술 협력을 더욱 강화하고 인적 교류도 확대하기로 뜻을 모았습니다.
The two sides agreed to expand joint studies in the defense industry, tackle online scam crimes, seek greater investment and trade through their bilateral free trade agreement, as well as improve the Korea-ASEAN agreement. Korean beef and pork from Jeju will also be exported to Singapore for the first time. Other areas of focus were green and digital industries and regional security.
In this uncertain and rapidly changing world, partnerships between like-minded countries like Korea and Singapore have become ever more vital. I look forward to working closely with President Yi on the many initiatives we have discussed today.
Several MOUs were exchanged for cooperation on digital content, culture, logistics, and shipping. The diplomatic super week that began with the ASEAN-related summits in Malaysia before the APEC meeting in South Korea's Gyeongju concluded with the bilateral summit in Seoul. What's key from here is how to materialize key summit deliverables. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung also reflected on the recent summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, saying South Korea-China relations have been fully restored. Writing on Facebook on Sunday, the president said the meeting was very meaningful in that as strategic cooperative partners, we are once again moving forward together on a path of pragmatism and mutual benefit. He also explained that the two sides agreed to regularize high-level communication channels and expand human and local-level exchanges. He emphasized that the foundation for economic cooperation will be strengthened through a currency swap agreement worth 70 trillion Korean won, or almost $49 billion, and by accelerating negotiations on free trade agreement services and investments. He also said he expects to visit China in the near future, as President Xi has extended an invitation. So this year's APEC leaders meeting, which many said would be a critical test for President Lee Jae-myung's pragmatic diplomacy, has come to a close. For more on the outcome of APEC and high-stakes meetings held on the sidelines of the event, we're joined today by Professor Chung Gu-yeon, Associate Professor of Political Science at Gangwon National University. Professor, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into the details, what's your overall assessment of Korea's hosting of APEC this year? Would you say the Yi administration has successfully cleared a major diplomatic hurdle?
Actually, indeed, it was successful, given that our international environment where diplomacy has lost its value and rather kind of trade conflict and confrontations and wars are everywhere. It is important to host this multilateral setting so that everyone can join and discuss this issue in a collective manners. And in that sense, I think South Korean government and President Lee did a quite successful job in convening all of these meetings in bilateral, multilateral, unilateral, all of these meetings and was able to kind of induce resolutions at the end as a Gyeongju declaration.
Right, and speaking of that Gyeongju declaration, there have been concerns about a possible failure to adopt a joint statement, but APEC leaders did agree on a Gyeongju declaration like you just mentioned. What does this entail and what's your take on this development?
And as I said, and every leaders in the Asia Pacific actually understand the importance of these multilateral meetings. And even though they cannot agree upon the important things, such as more like a security issue, but at the same time, they understand maintaining this multilateral meeting is pretty important for the regional stability and prosperity. So when you look at the Gyeongju declarations, there are many actually issues, such as AI declarations and culture exchanges as a way of as a kind of new industry they can foster. But at the same time, they reconfirm that importance of multilateral trade as well as prosperity. So in that sense, I think they focus on what they actually agreed upon and actually the foundation they have to build upon to the future prosperity. So in that sense, I think Gyeongju Declaration is important so that they can sustain this spirit of multilateralism.
Right, and in Gyeongju, President Lee Jae-myung met with President Donald Trump, and they reached a trade deal that includes a $200 billion cash investment as part of a total of $350 billion investment package in exchange for lower tariffs on South Korean goods. Do you think this was a fair deal?
Well, as everyone knows, there has been many discussions and debate about whether this deal was actually a fair deal and whether, in order to be a fair deal, what can we do as a partner of the United States? As you all know, there has been many debates about it. But in any way, we were able to reach a deal with the United States. And I think more negotiation in detail are more to come, I think. It will take more times to specify the more specified plans and roadmaps so that we can actually invest our money to whatever the industry that the United States wants to invest, such as shipbuilding, semiconductor, or AI infrastructures. We need to discuss more about the specific plans in the United States and South Korea as well. So I think in that sense, we have to continue our effort to make this as a fair trade deals. But one concern is that as we invest our money and move our industrial facility to the United States, it might hollow out South Korea's industrial base. And as you know, many industries actually moved from South Korea to the United States. There are many factors actually affecting those decisions of the big conglomerates' decisions. But at the same time, as a result, our South Korea's industrial base are kind of hollowing out. So I think South Korean governments also take a serious considerations about the current industrial bases in the key cities in South Korea as well.
I see. And while President Donald Trump was in Gyeongju, he also authorized South Korea to build a nuclear power submarine. What does this mean for South Korea, and how might this affect Korea's relations with other neighboring countries?
Well, actually, what we asked is a nuclear fuel to extend our underwater capability, but we end up with President Donald Trump decisions that we are making our submarines in the Philly shipyard in the United States. So I think we have to discuss more in detail whether this is actually related to United States maritime strategies to be integrated more with their C2 system and more joint exercises and more joint kind of operations in the maritime domain, or we are just invest there or in developing their submarine developing capabilities. We have to see, but at this moment, I think the decision that Donald Trump make during this APEC summit is that South Korea and the United States to cooperate on the maritime industry as well as maritime security issue as well, which means that two countries' strategy interests should be aligned more in details in not only about the North Korea's but also related to China and other revisionist countries in the region.
Right, and Chinese President Xi Jinping was also in Gyeongju, and this was his first visit to South Korea in 11 years. He sat down with President Lee Jae-myung on Saturday. What's your take on their summit?
Well, it has been quite years that two countries' leaders actually met together as a summit level. So it is quite relieving that we are resuming our summit diplomacy with China. And having a dialogue with China is pretty important, and not only because we are close to each other in a geographic manner, but also we have a lot of issues to discuss, not only about economy, people-to-people exchanges or cultural exchanges, but also we have very serious issue in the Yellow Sea or West Sea, the artificial architecture established in the West Sea. So in that sense, it is pretty important to having a dialogue with Chinese counterpart. But at the same time, it was right after the Donald Trump decisions to allow South Korea to build a nuclear submarine, which actually that's why President Xi mentions that that should not intervene or affect China's core value. So I think China and South Korea, of course, we just started our dialogue. That's a good sign. But at the same time, we have very serious issue that might not be compatible with one another's strategic interests. So we need to continue our dialogue.
Right, we'll have to see how the bilateral relations play out. All right, Professor Chung, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The U.S. Supreme Court will begin hearing arguments this week on the legality of broad tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on South Korea and other countries. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said he's optimistic that the court will decide in the administration's favor and pointed to China's rare earth export curbs to justify the tariff measures. Our Lee Seung-jae explains more.
The U.S. Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on Wednesday on the legality of broad tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on South Korea and other countries. The case comes just days after Seoul and Washington wrapped up trade negotiations, adding new weight to the outcome. Lower courts have already ruled that Trump's tariffs violated U.S. law, but the final verdict remains uncertain, given the Supreme Court's conservative 6-3 majority. At the center of the dispute is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, or IEEPA, which allows presidents to take economic action during national emergencies. The question is whether Trump overstepped his authority when he invoked that law to impose what he called reciprocal tariffs. In April, Trump declared a national emergency, claiming that America's chronic trade deficits posed a threat to both national security and economic stability. He then imposed sweeping tariffs under IEEPA, setting a 25% duty on South Korean exports, which was later reduced to 15% after Seoul pledged a $350 billion investment in the United States. Small businesses and a dozen Democratic-leaning states sued, arguing that IEEPA does not grant presidents unilateral power to set tariffs, which the U.S. Constitution assigns to Congress. The lower courts agreed, ruling that Trump's executive order overreached the limits of presidential authority. Now, the Supreme Court must decide two key questions. Did Congress effectively delegate its tariff-making power to the president under the IEEPA? And can a trade deficit be considered a national emergency? Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent turned his attention to China on Sunday, calling Beijing an unreliable partner in certain trade areas. Speaking on Fox News Sunday, Bessent said he was surprised when China threatened to restrict exports of rare earth minerals, adding that Washington has plenty of things we can hold back to.
And we could threaten the tariffs again, and we have plenty of things that we can hold back too. Over the next 12 and 24 months, we're going to be moving at warp speed.
Bessent also expressed optimism as the Supreme Court prepares to hear arguments on Trump's tariff policy and the limits of presidential power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. 이승재, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here in South Korea, the country's defense minister An Gyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will visit the demilitarized zone today. Their visit to the joint security area marks the first joint trip to the DMZ by the defense chiefs of the allies since 2017. Hegseth, on his first visit to South Korea, wraps up his Asia tour that also included Japan, Malaysia, and Vietnam. During his stay, he's also scheduled to meet Korean and U.S. troops stationed at the DMZ and visit Camp Humphreys to thank service members and their families. On Tuesday, An and Hegseth will co-chair the annual security consultative meeting, focusing on North Korea policy coordination and strengthening the allies' combined defense posture. In other news, as South Korea seeks to advance its surveillance capabilities, over the weekend it launched the final satellite of Project 425. This allows South Korean authorities to monitor North Korea around the clock with updated surveillance every 2 hours. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
2, 1, engines for power.
At Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket took off on Sunday carrying South Korea's fifth and last satellite under the 425 project. The satellite reached orbit after 14 minutes and established communication with a ground station about an hour later.
The 425 Project's 5th satellite was launched normally from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, settled into its target orbit, and successfully communicated with the ground station, confirming the satellite is in good condition.
With this launch, South Korea's independent surveillance capabilities have been significantly enhanced. The 425 project is a major milestone in South Korea's independent defense strategy. It consists of 5 satellites, 1 electro-optical and infrared satellite, and 4 synthetic aperture radar or SAR satellites. The EOIR satellite provides extremely high-resolution image but is limited by weather conditions. The 4 SAR satellites use radar to capture images, allowing them to conduct surveillance 24 hours a day regardless of cloud cover or darkness. This launch completes the constellation of satellites in an impressively short time frame. The first satellite, the EOIR satellite, was launched in December 2023. With this 5th launch, South Korea has successfully deployed its entire medium to large satellite network in less than 2 years. The first 3 satellites are already fully deployed. The 4th is undergoing its final operational evaluation. Once this 5th satellite is also fully tested, the system will be complete. Once all the satellites are operational, the South Korean military can monitor key targets in North Korea at intervals of approximately 2 hours. This significantly reduces the country's reliance on foreign intelligence assets. It directly enhances the kill chain preemptive strike system, a core pillar of South Korea's 3-axis defense. DAPA added that this is not the final step. It plans to further strengthen surveillance assets by developing a constellation of microsatellites in the coming years to eventually shorten the monitoring cycle over the Korean peninsula to as little as 30 minutes. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And that was our final payload of the
Good morning. I'm Chi Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In England, a mass stabbing aboard a London-bound train on Saturday left 11 people injured, including a member of staff in critical condition. Police say a 32-year-old man from Peterborough is in custody on suspicion of attempted murder after armed officers boarded the train at Huntingdon Station, around 80 miles north of London. Authorities have ruled out terrorism, saying there is, quote, nothing to suggest extremist motives. Of the 11 people treated in hospital, 5 have been discharged, while the train crew member who tried to intervene remains in life-threatening condition. Police called the train staff's actions, quote, nothing short of heroic. In western Kenya, heavy rains triggered a devastating landslide, which as of Sunday has killed at least 26 people. Rescue operations have been suspended after flash floods swept through the Chesonga area of Kenya's Rift Valley region. Officials say 25 people remain missing. Interior Minister Kipchumba Murkomen said government is deploying aircraft to reach the isolated communities and aircraft supplies as roads have been washed away. Heavy rains continue across Kenya, displacing thousands of people, with authorities urging those in flood-prone zones to move to higher ground. The Kenya Red Cross warns the region remains vulnerable to further landslides. In central Vietnam, at least 35 people have been killed and 5 remain missing after record-breaking rains and flash floods swept through the region last week. Authorities say the torrential rainfall dumped up to 1.7 meters of rain in 24 hours at one point, the heaviest downpour ever recorded in the country. In Hoi An, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, water reached waist level, forcing residents to move through the ancient town by boat. Officials say more than 100,000 homes have been flooded and 40,000 livestock were lost. Experts warn that climate change is intensifying extreme weather across Southeast Asia. The Los Angeles Dodgers won their second straight World Series title on Saturday, defeating the Toronto Blue Jays in a dramatic 11-inning Game 7. The Dodgers overcame an early 3-run deficit, rallying behind series MVP Yoshinobu Yamamoto, whose pitching sealed the 5-4 victory. Toronto had led 4-3 until a game-time home run by Miguel Rojas in the 9th inning forced the extra innings. Despite the outscoring Los Angeles over the series, the Blue Jays fell just 2 outs short of their first championship in 3 decades. The Dodgers now become the first team since the New York Yankees in 1998 to 2000 to win back-to-back titles.
Every Monday for the past few weeks has been a tough one with a sharp drop in temperatures. Cold wave advisories have been issued across much of the country this morning, including here in the capital, marking the first of this autumn season. Seoul had a low below 1 degree with frost and thin ice forming over central inland areas. But actually, this round of winter chill will be short-lived. We'll see temperatures recovering to season norms tomorrow afternoon, then we'll enjoy late autumn weather by the end of the week. But this afternoon will stay chilly, with highs reaching only 13 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Chuncheon, Daejeon will make it to 14 degrees under sunny skies nationwide. Well, during this change in season, bundle up in layers and drink plenty of warm water, and be mindful of that sharp morning chill. Meanwhile, this Friday marks Ipdong, the start of the winter on the seasonal calendar.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.